So again, my name is Kelsey Weir. I'm a program coordinator. I've been with the district for about 3 years now. I came onto the Partnership Census Project in the spring, and I actually also have another presenter with me. Her name's Cornelius. She's currently a student, an undergraduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, and she has been a critical component of the school support census. She will be able to give you kind of a first-hand account of how the actual data collection was completed, as well as some of the challenges, limitations, and the qualitative feedback that we received. So please excuse us, we'll jump back and forth a little bit because I want her to be able to represent her fantastic work. Because while I dealt with things a little bit more on the back end, the data management, the analyses, the report writing, I think that she deserves so much credit for what she did and her absolute tenacity in making sure that this got done. Throughout the school year, she actually surveyed 213 schools to get this done, and she did it via phone, so it was definitely a really, really monumental effort. So I just wanted to give her a shout out before we started so that you knew what an important component she was to this entire process. There we go. All right. So before we go any further, Severin was talking a little bit about how we define supports within schools. Do we call them partners? Do we call them vendors? So for here, I've listed, for our purposes, I've listed out 6 different terms. So there's partner and partnership. So those are entities that come at no cost to the school. So a partner is the actual organization or the entity, the person who would be executing that no-cost relationship, while the partnership is the actual no-cost support relationship. A vendor, as you may expect, is someone who, an entity that provides support to schools at cost. And so it's the same thing for a vendor relationship. But the school support census actually expanded and tried to get an idea and a really accurate calculation of who was in the schools, whether a partner or a vendor. So unless it's obvious, like that it's just a partner or just a vendor, I will call them support providers and external supports. So Severin touched a lot on this, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. But previous efforts concerned only partners and partnerships, not vendors and or vendor relationships for the most part. And there was definitely a need to have a systematic way of collecting data from all schools. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on each of the many offices that have a reason to be stakeholders within this project. So first of all, obviously OSP, the desire to expand partnership and data collection efforts. And then there's the Research Review Committee, which is part of our office. I'm actually at the helm of the Research Review Committee, and we actually approve all external research within the district, but we deal a lot with grant-mandated evaluations. So program evaluations where people are looking for outcomes regarding programs that are being delivered in the form of a partnership or a vendor relationship. So we had a huge interest in this because we knew that there were things that were going on in data collection that was occurring without our knowledge, and we want to make sure that we have a really good feedback loop with all of our programs that are going on to make sure that we have only high quality programs going on within the district. Finally, Office of General Counsel, memorandums of understanding, making sure that everything that needs to be conducted legally is done correctly, and that's very important in terms of knowing exactly what's going on in each school and exactly how many schools each partner is in and what kind of services they are providing. And finally, the Grants Review Committee, which helps with grant-funded programs. So the goals of the School Support Census Project. First of all, create the most accurate listing of existing external support relationships as possible. This goes without saying. Severin has discussed it, that we were facing a very large vacuum of understanding in terms of not being able to really gather as comprehensive of as comprehensive of information as possible. So we wanted to find a way to be able to sort of start to build from the ground up and make sure that we had an accurate account of everything going on. We also wanted to establish a sustainable method of yearly support provider census collection. So I'll talk a little bit more about that, but our goal was to start something that we would be able to feasibly do year after year to make sure that we had real-time dynamic data. We also wanted to gather feedback from school leaders about their perceived area of need, so not just who their partnerships were, but where they felt a partnership could maybe fill a void within their school. We also wanted to share results with key stakeholders in order to drive decision-making across Philadelphia. And we wanted to lay the foundation for the expansion of a comprehensive network of well-implemented, evidence-based programs and partnerships within Philadelphia schools, because we don't just want any person walking into a school. We want to make sure that those people who are there are going to be supporting our students and our staff as much as possible.
So I came on in August of last year. I was hired specifically to carry out this School Support Census Project. I was hired knowing that I would be calling principals to collect data from them. And when I first sat down with the OSP team and the ORE team, they were telling me how much the goal of 100% participation across district schools was. And as Severin mentioned, the first round of data, there was 60%, which is really incredible if you're just sending out a form, but we really wanted to know everything that was going on, and the way to accomplish that was telephone interviews, because not only do you have a better chance of reaching people, but once you reach them, once you have them on the phone, we were able to extract a lot more data from them just from having a conversation. So I was that designated part-time staff member that was hired, and we started out with a data collection process. We tested it out on a group of principals, and I'll get into this a little bit further. It was not as we expected, so we changed our methods a little bit. That's on the next slide. And once we had perfected our methods to the best ability that we could, we talked to schools in cohorts, and we went with the learning networks because those already exist. And so we started with the turnaround schools because there's obviously a high priority to know what's going on with those schools and what their need areas are. And from there we went through the neighborhood schools. We also did high schools in the first section. Great. So regional data collection tools, we created a Qualtrics survey in which we were asked, we had all the questions that we would have basically sent to principals, and then the idea was that over the phone I would just be asking them those questions and then filling out the online survey as it went. However, what we learned, and I think what's been articulated before about this language around partnerships, is as much as we are trying to figure out what a partnership means, principals especially don't have a clear definition of what that is. So even if we have a list of 300 things that we consider to be a partner, when we ask them who's supporting your school, they might tell us 10 things that we didn't have on that list, and that's hard to support in a very fixed online survey. So we transferred over, we created a paper instrument instead, which meant that as we were on the phone with them, I was writing down the partners they were reporting in their own language. I was writing down what they were reporting that they were doing. And we also, so that allowed us to capture all of the new support providers that we learned about. We, I think, doubled at least the number of partners that we knew about in the district. And we also allowed for schools to report their areas of need. Principals, is this on the next slide? That they were given things ahead of time. Yes, here we go. So how it worked from my end is that I would email a principal, and we actually let the assistant superintendents know ahead of time that we were planning on doing this project, and to let their principals start thinking about it. And then once that learning network came up, I would email the principals and say, I'm planning on reaching out to you to talk about partnerships. And we sent them this big document we created that had all the partnerships that had been discovered in that first round, that first data collection effort, saying, here's what other people have listed as their partners. You might have some of these. You're probably going to have a lot of partners that you don't see on this list, but it gave them a way to start thinking about what we consider to be a partner. And we also wrote down about 20 different need areas that they might have, and there was also time during the interview for them to articulate a need that might not be on that area. But I think them having that tool ahead of time, or at least to look at while we were on the phone, made it easier to standardize the data that we were collecting. Because if we call in principal and just ask them without them having any point of reference, who are your partners and what are your needs, they're all going to approach that from a very different perspective. So between November and June, Talked to 213 principals, or if not the principal, if they had a Vista in the school, whoever in the school had the most access and knowledge about the partners in the school. So most of the time that ends up being the principal. Sometimes it's a school-based teacher leader, occasionally a counselor. The Vistas are obviously very well prepared to answer the questions that we had. And then we sent that data in waves to OSP so that as we were trying to collect this data, they could also be improving their practice and matching partnerships throughout the year, because there's a lot of urgency. As much as we want to have a very clean final result, we wanted it to be able to inform their practice along the way. So,
all right, so as a way to assure quality, we did not have those collecting data also entering data. So we had another fabulous part-timer. Her name's Kristen Pugliese. She's actually a student at Drexel, and right now she is doing her student teaching. So she could not be here, but she was just absolutely integral in being able to enter all the data. She entered the data for 213 schools, some of which had 50 plus partners. The process involved, sometimes if it was an unidentified partner, or if Sarah had just written down, church with a specific name, Kristen would need to actually look on the internet to verify who this was in order to make sure that we were recording everything exactly the same. I was a level of QA, so I did several levels of QA after Sarah had entered after Kristen had entered everything. We had separate files for each learning network because we wanted to be able to produce these school level reports for schools that listed all their partnerships or vendor relationships, as well as all of their needs, and we'd be able to give that back to them very quickly. And so that's why we set it up that way. Before we did analyses, we actually merged it into one master file in July 2016 so that we could really compare everything across the district. All right. And we also made sure that we standardized everything. So, there wouldn't be one partner being named under 6 names. Because the thing about this entire process that I want you to be aware of before we get into results is that these are reported names and reported support relationships. So this could mean that we didn't capture everything at a school if maybe the person who was talking to us, it just slipped their mind that day, or we were not able to verify what this person gave us, so we were not able to record it, or just that as we've said, the idea of a support provider hasn't really, reached out to everyone yet. So some people are not exactly sure what, a vendor versus a partner versus different things. So we may have missed a large chunk, but that's why this is a continual process of trying to improve and make sure that we're gathering the best data possible. So I just want you to know that these are all reported results. We may have missed something, but that's part of this entire process. All right. So as we've said, there are 213 district schools that participated in the census. 5 schools chose not to participate. It was voluntary. They did not have to. So we did not get 5 schools, but we came very close to that 100% goal. We did actually interview many of those in the Opportunity Network, but they are not included in this report, and they were included at the end. But they are a very different climate in terms of the actual school than our normal district schools. The census identified 1,690 unique external supports and 1,081 unique support providers. Across SDP, there was an average of 18.2 external supports reported for each school. And as you have probably figured out here, support providers can, and in many cases are, delivering multiple external supports to schools. So this is a pie chart that kind of breaks out for you what I was talking about and what we're looking at here. So we have the the largest group is only in one school, and then we have 13.4% that are in 2 schools, 10.8% that are in 3 to 5 schools, and 6.9% that are in 6 or more schools. But those 6.9% make up a lot of what we recorded. These are the primary impact areas of these external supports. So OSP helped us out a lot by categorizing some of the partnerships that were not easily identifiable for us. And so then we were able to actually categorize them for this chart to kind of give you the layout of what our support providers are largely giving to schools. All right. So as recorded, and obviously as reported, these are the programs that are in the largest amount of schools. So one of them is Eat Right Now. It is our nutrition education program. I'm actually an evaluator on it for SDP, and it is in 204 schools. So you'll see over here on the right, this is recording whether or not it is currently believed to be evidence-based and if there's an existing evaluation that we know about. Now obviously, we have to draw a line between a support provider that is just providing enrichment activities, so like the Franklin Institute. Are they really someone who needs to be evaluated, or are they someone who is just providing museum trips, or are they actually providing some sort of program that needs to be followed up upon to make sure that it is that it's being evaluated and that it is evidence-based? So that's kind of our next step, just to kind of do that as an aside, that we're starting to think about is how do we separate these and think about them differently, because they are different and equally important. All right, so now I'm going to start breaking them out. So first it will be the external supports, and then we'll go into needs, because we did see some very interesting things based on differences between schools. So the first one here is by grade span. So the average external supports are here. And so high schools have more, as well as K-8 schools. This is by network. So you'll see that Autonomy Network has the most, followed by 4, 5, 1, but Turnaround is a little bit lower, along with Network 9, Network 7. So if anyone's familiar with the SPR, some of you may be, some of you may not. It's the district's way, using several different variables to try and categorize schools based on performance, climate, a number of items and variables. But schools are categorized. So there's intervene, there's watch, there's reinforce, and then there's models. So first I want to call attention to the fact that there are 84 intervene schools, there are 91 watch schools, there are 28 reinforced schools, and there are 4 model schools. And as you can see, these schools are getting a lot more supports per school. This was done using ArcGIS. We actually mapped concentration of external supports by zip code, and schools are separated by quartiles. So you'll see the schools with the most are going to be represented by those blue dots. So it is fairly concentrated. The smaller, very light blue dots are also concentrated, and we found that the following zip codes have the fewest supports out of the district. All right, sorry for the color here. Looks a little brighter on the computer screen, but this is asking about partnership coordinators. So, Severin had said that it was already known that, there were not a lot of designated partnership coordinators, and people like principals or counselors occasionally have to step in to make sure that this important role is fulfilled within the schools. So what we found is that 25% do, 75% do not. So that definitely highlights the importance that we need to put on being able to designate someone. Methods of forming partnerships. As you can see, we have school seeks out partner and partner seeks out school. We definitely want, as Severin has said, to increase the amount here so that we have more control over partnerships and other support relationships that are going on within the district. All right, so going into need, sure.
The previous slide said other methods. And Any examples that you can refer to?
Sarah?
Other methods. A lot of the times that would be principals who told me that they didn't feel like they had gotten their partners that way. So it could have been that maybe less formal than the school seeking out the partner. It could be that a teacher at the school had a friend who worked for an organization and the organization came in that way. So less formal than the principal going to a fair and talking directly with someone. Although that would theoretically be through OSB.
So are some of those double coded?
A little, so occasionally, I think that this data especially was confusing for principals when they were understanding it. Sort of, a lot of the times they don't know if a principal's been in a school for a year. A lot of times this question wasn't answered. So I don't know if it's totally representative of the work that OSP does. So I definitely want to say that. If, I think that it's probably not to that scale. A lot of times a principal would have been there for 2 or 3 years, and they said, "Well, we have these 15 partners. I don't know where they came from." You know, and we can't really do much else with that data. So.
And yes, it was double coded.
Yeah,
yes, it was, because it was double coded. So schools could say, well, I mostly do A, but I also sometimes do
so it wasn't
C.
It wasn't for each partner, it was for the school in general.
Yep.
And we are not defensive about this. I mean, we would expect to see this again because we were sort of inheriting an ecosystem of partnerships across the school. So, our goal is to help facilitate schools and partners finding each other and establishing partnerships. So, I mean, I think us playing a central role is important, but we also don't want to discourage a school from having a sense of agency about seeking out partners. We just want to help them out when they do that. Yeah.
All right, so need areas. So we listed 36 areas of need that a principal could respond to and list as something that they felt their school could use. So some of the examples are college and career readiness, mental and behavioral health, parent engagement, and STEM. On average, schools reported 9 areas of need, and also on average, the types of schools with fewer external supports, i.e. those watch and intervene schools, have a greater number of self-reported needs. So this is again need areas by grade spans. So you see a little less under the district average for both elementary schools and K-8 schools. And then for middle school and high schools, they are actually both tied and they are above the district average. So if you can remember the previous graph that I showed you that talked about by SPR tier, how many external supports these schools had, it's the exact reverse, basically. So these schools model schools are reporting just 3.8 needs on average per school. Root Reinforce is just 7.1, and then Intervene and Watch, their averages are above the district average. And I put them together here for you. So you can see that the schools that have more supports have less needs. Now, that could be because they have more supports right now, but also you have to consider the climate of the schools that are reporting having more supports. Is it their climate that is leading more partners to seek them out or them to be able to set up more partnerships? Or is it their location? Is there something else going on? Or is it just simply that they right now have more supports, so they feel that they have less needs? But it's definitely something that highlights that there is some inequity going on within our schools, and we need to work to make this more of an equal bar graph. All right, so district-wide, our reported need areas. So the highest priorities reported by all schools were mental and behavioral health, mentoring, parent and community engagement, attendance and truancy, tutoring, arts and cultural enrichment, field trips, school climate and safety, STEM or STEAM, and donations. The lowest priorities were mentioned were mostly college and career readiness, but that can also be attributed to the fact that a lot of the schools that we're talking to are K-8s or are elementary schools. So that may have affected the data there. So we broke it out based on school type in the next slide.
And one quick note on that.
Mm-hmm.
I just remember that the question around some of those college and career ready need areas were broken out. I'll let you go ahead, Sarah.
Do you want me to I think that when we asked principals, do you have college and career readiness as a need area? In order to help Ayana do her job best, we asked them to identify their 3 main areas within that. So it could be SAT, it could be financial, or it could be scholarship research, it could be the like college readiness mentoring, just to sort of see within this big field of college and career readiness, what do they need to look for. So I think a lot of them were like, please just check all of them off. They're like, you need all of these, but sometimes they did abide to that 3, even though they might have had more than those that were listed.
All right, so as would be expected, high schools, college access and readiness, college campus visits, mental and behavioral health, student internships, SAT, ACT prep, those all fall within the top 10. And then for K-8, obviously, you're going to see some of these down reported as zeros. Some of the K-8s did express that college and career readiness was obviously still important to them, but it largely depended. But their largest needs reported were mental and behavioral health, very similar to high schools in that aspect, mentoring, parent and community engagement, attendance and truancy.
When I had finished interviewing principals, asking them to talk about their partners and their need areas, I also asked them if they had any other concerns about partnerships, any ideas, any barriers that were in their way to forming partnerships. And this was a really informative part of the conversation a lot of the time, and it's a lot more qualitative, so it's a little bit more difficult to quantify. But a few things that came up a lot. The need for a partnership coordinator has already been mentioned several times, so I won't go into that too much, and looking forward to hearing more about that. Red tape, that essentially plays out. There are schools that want to keep their building open until 8 or 9 p.m., and they can't do that because of district rules. Or I heard about LCAs a lot, and I'm not totally sure how those function, but neither are the principals, and they would often get tied up in red tape. So there are barriers that are more structural. Non-K-8 schools, you saw those graphs where the K-5s and also the 6-8s, the middle schools, had less partners. And there were principals who really articulated this. They said, we wanted to have a certain STEM program come in, but they only go to K-8s. Or parents in middle schools are especially less likely to be engaged, principals were telling me, than if it's a middle school and an elementary school combined. So they were looking especially for support in those areas, but having a harder time finding it. Cost and funding can be a barrier. This plays out more than just the vendor relationships. There were principals who said that partnerships cost even if they're free, and that can be anything from if you go on a field trip, the parents who come with you still have to pay to go to the museum. They're not free. If you have a meeting for all your partners to get together, you buy food, and that costs the school money. So there are principals who are automatically turned off at the idea of creating partnerships because they see it as a cost that they are not in a position to pay. Lack of information. A lot of principals felt confused about how to even go out seeking partnerships, and I think that there's I always referred them straight to OSP, but they were looking for manuals, they were looking for databases. I think a lot of things that this information can hopefully provide for them going forward. Title I and location, schools across the entire spectrum in Philly felt like they were being ignored by partners for some reason or another, either because they were way off in the Northeast and it was too far for partners to get out there, or they were in unsafe neighborhoods and they felt like volunteers didn't want to come in, or because they didn't have a lot of Title I funding, so they didn't think that partners identified them as a school with needs. Beyond that, there was a principal at a citywide high school who had previously been in a neighborhood high school who said that the citywide schools get less support even though those kids walk through the door with the same problems that kids in the neighborhood schools do and need just as much support. Background checks was really interesting. In certain neighborhoods, we saw how high mentoring was on that list. If there was a principal who told me that they had a bunch of people who wanted to mentor their middle school boys, but they had been previously incarcerated and they could not get the background checks passed to go in and mentor, which is kind of heartbreaking because there's this need and there are people who want to fill that. Physical forms for schools, if the parents, kids can't participate in sports after schools or in physical after school activities if they don't have the physical forms, and there's a lot of times that the forms will be sent home and they'll never get back and then the kids can't participate. Program attendance, a lot of the times if there were principals who would say we have an after school program but we're going around knocking on doors trying to get it filled. So there's also the problem of really meeting the need that is in the school, and I think that was maybe evidence of some of the challenges with that.
So our key lessons, so the landscape of external supports is much more vast and complex than we had originally expected. There are 2 tiers, as I was talking about earlier, of external supports. So there are the evidence-based, and they are typically large-scale programs, typically academic or otherwise. And then there's the enrichment relationships, typically small scale, maybe the Franklin Institute, for example, allowing students to come out to the museum for free. So we need to recognize that and treat those differently. On average, the types of schools with fewer external supports have a greater number of self-reported needs. SDP would benefit from an up-to-date database, editable in real time, that would allow OSP and other key admin offices to react quickly to the needs of schools and providers. So one of the things that we are working on, potentially with Penn, is to develop an online database that would allow both the public as well as us, obviously, to access this information and be able to update it throughout the school year. A large number of existing external supports that do not have any rigorous third-party evaluation on file need to be contacted and worked with through the Office of Research and Evaluation. So that is something that we will partner with OSP to start working on, not to kind of serve as someone trying to get partnerships in trouble or anything like that, but just making sure that, as I've said before, that we just have the highest quality of partnerships within our schools working with our students. All right, so moving forward, just continuous collaboration, dissemination of our results to key stakeholders and people across Philadelphia. The School Support Census 2016-2017, and again, our goal of an electronic system that we would hopefully be able to make public at one point. Again, that creation of that online public and interactive tool, and then using records to encourage a feedback loop between us and partners. All right, and final thoughts. So we want to obviously encourage these relationships for our schools because they are obviously beneficial, though many are not appropriately evaluated for fidelity of implementation and/or outcomes. Popularity and utility of such relationships highlights the need for a standardized procedure of recording, maintaining, and evaluating partnerships. So our hope would be that we'd be able to use that online database as a tool for this. And then the ultimate goal of high quality, well implemented, evidence-based partnerships and vendor relationships district-wide. So that is our ultimate goal. Thank you so much.